Hello Goodies fan, it's Jeffers here, welcoming you to another Goodies podcast interview re-release flashback. This time around it's with Goodies musical director Dave MacRae, and this was originally released in February 2010. Yes, way back when it was Goodies podcast number 8. So without any further ado, let's hear from the man, the musician, Dave MacRae. David, it'd be good to start with where you got your musical education, where you learned your craft, those sorts of things. How did you sort of get into the music biz?
Okay, well, I was born in New Zealand and lived there until I was 19, and it was probably while I was at university I started to develop an interest in mostly in jazz music, but at the time we were also performing the days of Bill Haley and rock and roll and dance halls, and so that's where the employment came. But being a very limited area to work in, I came to Australia in 1959 and spent those wonderful years of the 1960s, the entire 1960s here in Australia, and developed my skills with all sorts of jazz players, and as part of the recording industry that Festival Records was then kind of in control of. We used to do cover versions of all kinds of American hits for local artists, so we'd churn them out at a rate of knots, as it were, and so I learned my writing craft there pretty much, string sections and vocal harmonies and all that sort of stuff, mainly in the areas of pop music. And in 1969, my wife, Joy Yates, a singer, and myself went to live in America. We just felt that it was time to move on and see if we could chance our arm in the major league, as it were, and moved to Los Angeles and lived there for a couple of years. And during that time, I was lucky enough to join the Buddy Rich Band. It's a famous jazz band. He's was considered when he was alive to be the world's greatest drummer, etc., etc., and travelled the world and with his band for the best part of a year, including most of America and lots of parts of Europe. At the end of this period, it's a very wearing experience to work in a band like this. I kind of had enough, and so Joy had stayed in London. I went back to London expecting to stay about 3 months, and just started to get all kinds of interesting things to do. It was the end of hippie days and so on, very creative period in the English music world. And I just moved into the area of learning about electronic keyboards and stuff like that. So that's basically it. So here I am. We're up to about the point where the Goodies were doing their recordings. So we're looking now when Michael Gibbs was the musical director at, say, 1971 and 2.
Right. And so
that's in as briefly as I can, that's kind of it, yeah.
And so it's at that point you started playing with the Goodies band. How did that happen?
The musical member of the Goodies is Bill Oddie, as you probably know, and he used to come and watch me play different gigs, and Michael Gibbs went back to America and left the country, and so Bill asked me to do the Goodies recordings. It's not really such a thing as a Goodies band, I should point out. I mean, even though the same kind of music is played a lot of the time in the various episodes, it's done as a session routine. All the players are session players, and kind of that's how it is. So I became musical director on Michael Gibbs' departure, and I also did the recordings within the Michael Gibbs band when he was actually the musical director as well. All that electric keyboard stuff is mine.
Ah. So what other instruments do you play aside from piano then?
Well, I have played in the past the trombone and the violin and mallet instruments, vibraphone, marimba, but primarily keyboards.
Right, were you doing any other TV session work, any other shows?
Well, that was a very fruitful time in London. Lots of sessions going on. I did dozens and dozens and dozens of sessions for pop music people, Cilla Black, Olivia Newton-John, Cliff Richard, and all sorts of other people. And some film sessions, Superman and other things, all that, just as a session player. That's kind of how it was then, really. There were lots and lots of sessions, 3 a day usually.
Oh, so it was very quick turnaround time. You didn't have much time to mess about.
Well, no, you're expected to have the skill to be able to do what's required in a fairly short time.
Well, we know Bill liked to work with tape recordings of hummed melodies and things like this, is what we've heard. So would he give you a cassette, or was it a lot of face-to-face work? What was your process after he'd sort of give you a tape or hum you a melody?
Well, it can be done either way. Primarily, we didn't work much with tapes, actually. I'd spend some time with him, and he'd say, I think, because he's an intuitive musical person. So he would be able to say, sort of sing or hum. I want it to kind of sound like this, blah blah blah, da 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 dum da dum da dum da dum, or whatever, And I'd say, okay, so maybe we need to put this into some sort of form, and I'd put the tunes into form and make suggestions about what we might use with instrumentation and perhaps how to change the idea he'd given me in the first place. And so it's a kind of evolving process. One song would develop, and that's kind of, he'd have his input, I'd have my input, and that was the end result was what you hear.
Right, and so where would these meetings with Bill take place, and typically sort of how long would you sit down for and nut it all out?
Well, there's no hard and fast rules to anything like that. Sometimes it'd be in my place, sometimes his place, wherever it was, sometimes in the studio. We'd do things on the spot in the studio sometimes.
Right, so between sitting down and nutting it out like that and actually having to record, how long would you have?
Well, perhaps I should explain to you and to your interested parties that each series is 13 weeks long. So all the music for one whole series is done in whatever time is allotted to us at BBC, for those BBC programs, in the BBC studio. So probably in a couple of days we would knock over all the music for 13 episodes. So all that music would be planned over maybe a period of, a day or something, maybe a couple of days. And then when the session times came up, I'd have it prepared. We'd take the musicians into the studio and we'd record the music for the whole series.
Right. So out of all those years of doing it, which songs do you clearly remember, if any, and why?
Not many, to be perfectly honest. But one of the things about comedy is that to a certain extent, if the visual thing is funny, then frequently what's going on behind it has to be quite straight to make it appear funny. It's a complicated thing. And sometimes when the visual thing is straight, the actual sound production or whatever musically is going on has to be funny. It's a mixture of things. And also within the structure of the pieces that were recorded, you'll find that there's some very good improvisation from the guitarists, myself and guitarists and other people. And that actually is, when you see all the chase scenes and stuff like that, that's pretty much improvisation from people like Chris Spedding, who's a really great guitar player who now lives in New York. There's lots of wonderful musicians played on these tracks. Kenny Wheeler, who's regarded as one of the great jazz trumpet players, and a very good violin player. Paul Hart, who also was musical director for lots of television stuff, and I'm trying to think which one it was he did recently, Wire in the Blood or something like that, And he's a seriously good violin player, but you're asking what I remember. I remember his version of Land of Hope and Glory played on the violin. Absolutely excruciatingly awful. And when I remember how great he is as a player, it's a great memory. So I'm trying to give you the idea that there are lots of great people played on the tracks. You'd never really know that because we were lucky in the sense that most of them enjoyed the relief of not having to be too serious about their sessions.
Right, and did you handpick a lot of these guys, and did they
change?
Oh,
absolutely, yeah.
Right, so from season to season, would you have generally the same crew?
As much as possible, but sometimes special people were called in for, like, for example, the violin thing from Paul Hart. And then for whatever else is needed, you know. You just call special people in if it's some kind of thing that needs doing. There's some vocals in some of the tunes and so on as well, you know.
Right, and so who was your bass player back then, and who was your drummer? Which rhythm section would you use?
Well, in the early days, John Marshall played the drums mostly. He's from the Soft Machine. And Jack Bruce played the bass a couple of times, or a guy called Brian Odges, you probably wouldn't know, and various other bass players after that time.
So if you had to describe the style of the music over that time in a sentence, you know, what would it be? I mean, I think it's very funky, but, you know, that's just coming at it from a hack point of view.
No, I think that's a fairly accurate summation, really. Bill really liked that, you know, his character is one of bouncy, you know, effervescent, and that's the kind of music he liked as well. So funk music was obviously straight up for him, you know, no problem. He liked country music, and so you'll hear some of those kind of two-beat country tunes in there. So we worked on the premise of funk, unless it was a highly prescribed thing that required some sort of pathetic theme or something like that, you know.
Oh.
So funk music is a pretty good description. That was the early days of funk music too, so, you know, that was considered quite adventurous in its time.
Oh, and because the Goodies, you know, they were constantly sort of satirising a whole bunch of things going on in society. Would that happen with the music as well? I mean, would Bill ever bring in a recording and say, I absolutely want to take the piss out of this? You know, can we do something in the style of, you know, Band X or whatever it happened to be?
I don't know if you ever saw Wild Thing.
Yeah.
Well, if you listen to the music track on that was these really accomplished session guitar players going absolutely insane with the guitar and the distortion and the horrible notes and all that stuff, just because and so many times a lot of bad musical traits are heralded as being genius, so they let themselves indulge in a whole bunch of bad traits, let's put it that way.
Yeah, often it's harder to play something wrong if you're a trained muso than it is to play it right. You know, if you go, here you go, I want you to play this really badly, it'd be quite a bit of effort.
Well, it actually takes quite a skill, to be perfectly honest, yeah.
So, did you or the band ever get any sort of fan correspondence at the time, or since?
I don't think so. Certainly not me. And any correspondence would have gone straight to Bill's management, and I don't think that that would apply to us really, or the BBC, and they wouldn't pass it on anyhow. You know.
So do you? I mean, when was the last time you stumbled across an episode of the Goodies? You don't own any of the DVDs or see it on?
I don't own any of the DVDs. No. I have, of course, they're running them on pay television here in Australia now.
Yeah.
And occasionally I'd have a look and think, oh, I remember that. Yeah, that was fine. The last time I saw Bill was when he visited here, maybe. How long ago? 6 years ago, maybe?
Yeah, 2005, yeah.
Was it? Okay, yeah. That's the last time I saw him.
Right, so did you just go to the Sydney concert?
I went to a couple of concerts. I mean, he came out of the house and we had a bit of a rave and all that sort of stuff. They actually wanted me to go and play the clavinet Funky Gibbon thing on their show, but did you see the show?
Yeah. I flew to Queensland from Perth to see it.
Oh, there you go, okay. And but I said to him, look, I really don't think it's worth the trouble. They had travel around with you guys for one show, for one song. And so they used, I think they used a track. I can't remember now. I think that's what they used, some sort of track. And but it was good to catch up with them. And they did extremely well, you know. They came out to do, I think, 2 shows and ended up doing 13. So there you go.
Yeah, I think they've been back a couple of times. Graham and Tim have, at any rate.
Yeah, but Bill won't come again. He actually doesn't like doing it anymore, you know.
Yeah, and probably all the travel, and he's got many a show to film when he's over there. He probably hasn't got the time either.
Well, he's in a different space now. Yeah, different things.
Yeah. So it's been said that the Goodies as a production was fairly unique and worked well because they get all the departments together around the table. They give each episode's requirements a good sort of group run through, you know, with the visual effects guys, the set building people, the makeup people. And they'd have these sort of production meetings to make sure everyone's on the same page. Did that include yourself as the music honcho?
Did you? Is that how you understand it?
Oh, well, this is what we've sort of heard in interviews with various people who are connected with the show.
Okay, well, that's fine. Only reason I ask is I never paid any attention to how they went about their process, really,
Yeah, and they've done a few commentaries on the DVDs, and then they'd say that. So they'd say, okay, this effect here was worked out beforehand, and we'd have everyone in the room going through, what we're going to do. But I guess mainly that was on screen. So I was just wondering if...
Yeah, that's on screen. That's pretty standard procedure for television. The visual is by far the most important aspect. It's our strongest sense. It's not surprising. And they would work everything out. There'd have to be storyboard, blah, 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 just like making every episode into some mini movie, I guess, I imagine that's how it would run anyhow. And they would also probably do a lot of them at once rather than have a meeting every week to discuss how's this one going to go. It would be done, probably all the 13 series would be talked about at length, and then I imagine this is how it would be, and done in one sequence, as it were.
Yeah, that makes sense. When you watch it week by week, you just assume it's done that way. And, of course, if you put a second's thought into it, you go, of course it's not going to work that way.
Yeah, and
right.
It's mostly budget constraints. I mean, the BBC's programs were done really pretty much on a shoestring basis. Not too much generosity there. That's just the way that the budget was allotted to make it work, And so sometimes perhaps they're out on a location. There might be a piece of that location filmed for episode 1 and a piece of that location in episode 5 and 7 and so on. You don't notice it as the episodes are put up, but just making sense of the budget, really.
So when they did the ITV series after a bit of a break, did you go over and do all the music for that? Or?
Yeah, I did all of those. Actually, I like the ITV series. It's London Weekend, I think it was.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they actually spent a lot more money, to be honest. But I don't really think they were all that successful. I mean, I haven't seen any of those ones in recent times at all.
Oh.
But I don't know about you. Maybe you have.
Oh, they brought them all out on DVD in 2007.
Oh, DVD, okay.
And that's the first most Goodies fans would have seen it. If they were lucky enough to catch it in the early 80s, fair enough. But I certainly hadn't seen a single episode of those until they came out on DVD. So it was great. It was just like having a new series.
Oh, well, that's good, because they were the end. That was the end, actually. That was about 82, I think, or something like that.
Yeah.
Those are the last ones that were ever done. Yeah.
So I was just going to ask, where can people see you playing now?
Oh, me. Well, I live in Sydney. Have done for the last, after spending 15 years in London, and been here for the last 20-odd years, and I spend a lot of my time teaching at the Australian Institute of Music. I teach contemporary music students, and I do performances with my wife Joy. We play around local venues. We're about to launch ourselves into a play that we did some time ago, and is now being rerun for the Adelaide Cabaret Festival, based on one of Billie Holiday's last performances, and it's a play written by a New York playwright, and we've done it before, and it'll be quite successful, a bit harrowing, but her life was not a happy one, but nonetheless it's a good thing to do. And I've got a concert with Bob Barnard, who's a well-known trumpet player, in about a week's time, and player just went all over the place, really, whenever it's possible. So nothing like with the frequency we used to work, but that's just natural enough in Australia. The population is much smaller and the opportunities are really not all that frequent, but enjoying life, absolutely.
Right. And it hadn't occurred to me that Jade MacRae was your daughter, and you see her on the television there, and I just thought, oh, yeah.
Jade's a really accomplished musician. She's, in addition to her skill as a contemporary music composer and pop music composer and performer, she has classical music degrees on the piano and the violin, and she's a very good songwriter and all of that stuff. But she's chosen to take the path of contemporary music performance, and mostly in pop music. And she has in the past done a lot of tunes that have been like R&B songs, but she's just completed another set of recordings, and you'll probably be hearing about them within the next few months, I would think. And they're a sort of change in direction for her, let's say.
Oh, cool. Well, you must be pretty chuffed with all of that.
Oh, absolutely. Every person is their own person, and everyone gathers their own information that they need to make their life work, from all sorts of areas. So it's not really, we never pushed her into the music business. We had hoped that she'd be a lawyer or a doctor or something sensible, but was not to be. So she's a great talent, and I hope everyone enjoys her stuff.
Yeah, I suppose you can't fight genetics. If the music's in there, there's not much you can do.
I don't know.
Oh, so I'm going to ask you a question. I know the answer is going to be no, but have you heard any work by Bill's daughter or her band?
I know Rosie, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, I have, actually. Yeah. Well, actually, Rosie was here maybe 3 years ago.
Ah, what, touring or?
Yeah, no, she was just hanging around, I think, basically. And she came with a friend, and they attended. They came to see us, and they attended a music camp that Joy and I run every year up here on the northern beaches, and we spent some time with her, and I heard some of her songs then. Now my son's a drummer, and he's just been to New York, and he's just come back again, and he on the Facebook stuff and all that, he corresponds with her quite regularly, I think.
Right. Oh, I hear Graham's son is the keyboardist in Scissor Sisters, and they're pretty big internationally.
Yeah, Graham's, I think it's his son, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you very much again for chatting with us, Dave.
No really problem, Jeff. Look, I hope some of it's useful, I'm sure.
Excellent. Thanks again, Dave.
No problem, Jeff.
Cheers.